and welcome back to Digital Undivided's Undivided We Rise Summit. I'm Lauren Maillian, and I'm the CEO of Digital Undivided. I'm joined today by our Director of Research, Evaluation, and Data, Danielle Jackson. Welcome, Danielle. Our work at Digital Undivided is so important to us, and I invited you to do a deep dive with me today on the current state of Black and Latinx women founders based on our recently released 2021 update to the ProjectDiane report. We know we have lived through quite the year, but for those of you who don't know, ProjectDiane was the first data report ever to look at the state of Black and Latinx women founders and the startups that they lead in the United States. We know that tracking this is more important now than it has ever been before. 2020 was an anomalous year, characterized by social, economic, and political crises, including the COVID-19 pandemic and a global movement towards racial justice. This led to both unprecedented challenges and new opportunities for Black and Latinx women entrepreneurs. Studies show that COVID-19 alone has sped up digital transformation by 5.3 years. In reaction to this, we have shifted and will now provide more frequent updates and reports of our findings, including quarterly white papers, insights, and investigative responsive research reports. We are here to track everything as it happens. As we were the first to gather and report on Black and Latinx women entrepreneurs and innovators through ProjectDiane, we will continue to be at the forefront of this data to better inform the ecosystem at the speed at which it operates. So today, we are so excited to share the most recent update to ProjectDiane. This update includes Q4 2020 data and Q1 2021 data. If you're interested in learning more about ProjectDiane or downloading our reports, please go to ProjectDiane.com. Danielle, you work diligently with the entire research team to pull together insights as the landscape for Black and Latinx women founders is ever evolving. At Digital Undivided, we have our fingers on the pulse of these real-time shifts in innovation based on your team's hard work and a couple of my good questions to help guide the research that we really want to deeply understand. Danielle, welcome.
Thank you, Lauren. It's very exciting to have this conversation. As you noted, this report typically has come out every 2 years. We had our 2016 report, 2018 report, and then our 2020 report. And again, as you noted, so many people had questions about what does the full year 2020 data look like for Black and Latinx women founders? What's the outlook for them going into 2021? So we felt like, given the anomalous year that we had, given all that transpired last year, all the challenges that people had in general, and that of course business owners had, we wanted to do this updated report. So I'm looking forward to kind of diving into the stats and getting your take on some of the perspective around why we're seeing some of the trends that we're seeing in the ecosystem.
So let's dive right in. Our 2020 ProjectDiane research report found that while more women founders were raising funding for their companies, Black and Latinx women founders still received less than 1% of venture capital funding across the board. Where are we now with the ProjectDiane database, and has there been any growth since our last report?
Yeah, so first, just to give some updates about our database, I'm really happy to say that as of now, we have more than 800 companies founded by Black and Latinx women founders. As of our last report at the end of 2020, we had just under 700. And so, now we've been able to add over 100 companies over the last 6 months. And just to say a bit about criteria for anyone who's curious or interested, we focus in this report on US-based, for-profit, tech-enabled companies that have at least one Black woman or Latinx woman founder.
Let's discuss funding for these founders, and then I'll speak on why I think there's a growing trend. Danielle, can you share a little bit about what the data says about funding right now for Black and Latinx women and how that has evolved even since our 2020 report?
Sure. So first, I'll say one of the major findings from our look into the database, over this past year is that, founders are still in business, right? So a big trend last year, a big question that a lot of people had about businesses were, are they going out of business? And what we're seeing for the founders in our database is that, they are still active, they're still around, and so we hope that that continues. A trend that we're seeing in terms of funding for these founders is that there was basically a burst of funding at the end of 2020. So in Q4 2020 and in Q1 2021, we saw record fundraising for some of the businesses in our database. And this trend is aligned with, trends across the industry. So, 2020 was a year, right, where a lot of people had, questions about, again, our business is going to survive, are investors going to continue to invest in businesses? And though things were slowed down for sure at the beginning of the year and the beginning of the pandemic, things really picked up towards the end of the year. So in Q4 2020, we saw Black and Latinx women-founded companies receiving over $400 million in funding, which took the total for the year over $700 million. And then coming into Q1 2021, we saw almost $1 billion in funding coming to Black and Latinx women founders. And so quite a bit of that was attributed to some unicorns that we'll talk about a little bit later. But we were glad to sort of see that funding, right, coming to businesses founded by Black and Latinx women. And the total funding that we saw for Black and Latinx women founders at the end of 2020 was almost up to the $4 billion mark. So in our last report, we said that we were up to 3.1 billion about 8 months into 2020. And at the end of the year, it was almost 4 billion. So, and then coming into Q1 2021, we are now almost approaching $5 billion. Not quite there, but we are over the $4 billion mark. So we've seen a big jump in funding just in the last 6 months. And what I should also say, though, about this is even as we've seen, this big funding burst, this jump in funding at the end of the year and coming into Q1 2021, the overall share of VC funding that goes to Black and Latinx women-founded companies has actually declined relative to the share in 2018 and 2019. So in our last report, we noted that Black and Latinx women-founded companies were receiving 0.67% of total VC funding. And now we've seen that share dip down to less than 0.5%. So now we're at about 0.43%. And so some of that is attributed to the fact that there was actually record investment across the venture capital industry last year. So again, even as folks thought that 2020 might be a year where we saw, big slowdown and limited funding, it actually was a record year with funding upwards of $160 billion. And so we saw the share of that funding coming to Black and Latinx women founders declining a bit.
So it sounds like these founders are persevering, and our database is growing and the funding is increasing, but still too slow. We are still struggling to move the needle in increasing our overall funding past the 1% of share of VC funding allocated to the businesses of Black and Latinx women. It's a problem for me, it's a problem for us at Digital Undivided, and a problem that still speaks to the need for partnership and support around our mission. Our mission to create a world where all women own their work, even with the social and political climate, the increased awareness of supporting people of color, we're lagging. Regardless, we're still getting just less than 1% of that VC funding being distributed to us. I don't know what to say other than as long as I've been in this industry, the stats have been this bad. So Danielle, please tell our audience what you have learned from being able to gather this data as well.
Sure. So as you mentioned, things are still moving, too slowly for Black and Latinx women founders in terms of funding. But I do want to mention some, of the success stories from the past 6 months. So just to say a bit about some unicorn companies that we saw have, mega rounds of funding. There's Savage X Fenty, which had $115 million Series B round in February. Then we had BlockFi, which had a $350 million Series D round, and also City Block Health, which in the last 6 months has raised over $350 million. So I did want to take a moment to just highlight these companies and they think about City Block Health in particular. A big trend that we saw last year is that a lot of funding went to companies that are health oriented, right, or health focused, which is so important during this ongoing pandemic.
It's definitely a positive sign to see that deal sizes are increasing for this community of founders. And we have found quite a few unicorn companies being led by Black and Latinx women. That's something I've been waiting a long time to see. I talk often about redefining what the face of a unicorn founder should look like. Historically, it's been the face of white men, and slowly but surely, women are inching their way into this category of wealth creation and innovation, being these billion-dollar business unicorn founders. But women of color are getting in at a much slower pace. And in the grand scheme of unicorn companies, less than a handful right now are led by Black and Latinx women. That's a problem. That's a problem that we're here to solve. And I really want to talk more specifically about the $1 million club. Here at Digital Undivided, we closely track the small and growing group of Black and Latinx founders who have reached the milestone of securing more than $1 million in VC funding. What do those numbers look like after Q1 of 2021?
Yes, Lauren. So as you mentioned, we do track women, Black and Latinx women founders who have raised more than $1 million in venture capital. And we refer to this group as the $1 million club, right? This is one of our key metrics that we're tracking with our ProjectDiane research. And so I'm happy to report that the number of women in the $1 million club has gone up. There have been some new additions to this group at the end of 2020 and coming into 2021. So just for reference, for anyone who's new to the research, in our 2018 report, we reported that there were 79 Black and Latinx women founders who had raised over $1 million. And now that number is over 200. We're up to 226 Black and Latinx women founded companies that have raised more than $1 million in venture capital. And 27 of those were added just, again, in this sort of Q4 2020 going into Q1 2021 period. And three that I just want to mention in particular who are profiled in this ProjectDiane 2021 update are Jessica Etting of Flourish Savings, Farrah Allen of The Labs, and Yalitza Jean Charles of Healthy Roots Dolls. And these founders and these companies represent a range of industries, and just as all of the founders in our ProjectDiane database do. So it's really exciting to see that there are these gains, to see that there are women who are continuing to raise large rounds, that we are starting to see more unicorns. And as we've already spoken to earlier, there's still lots of work to be done. Most founders don't raise money. And when founders do raise money, when Black and Latinx women founders do raise money, they're raising well below the median amount for seed rounds and rounds at every stage for founders. And so we want to continue tracking this data. We want to continue to just get as much information as we can and present and give out as much information as we can about the experiences of these founders, not just with funding, but in terms of starting their businesses, every stage of the process. And this research is really exciting to me for years, even before joining Digital Undivided. When I was working at university, I'd always been interested in economic development, economic opportunities for Black women, for underrepresented founders, for underrepresented entrepreneurs. And this work has just been really, really interesting, really exciting. And I'm, again, so happy to see these gains, but we have a long way to go. So Lauren, I would love to hear some of your thoughts around what you're seeing, in the ecosystem. What more can we do? What more needs to be done to continue to support these founders and to see some of the parity that we want to see for these innovators?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. And that's one I've been asking myself for, I think, about 16 or 17 years. You know, we have always been on the cusp, if you will, of having a monumental moment for Black and Latinx women of color founders. And then something always happens that continues to pull us back. And while now we are seeing greater success than we've ever seen before, and thankfully, you know, you and your team are doing such an incredible job to make sure we're capturing every single data point and to try to really tie in cause and correlation to the trends that we're seeing. I'm even more curious, I think, about what our solution could be, or what the solution should be, to constantly being outpaced by the non-minority, right? I think that the progress that we have made is very important, and I do want to always celebrate that, but we have to also put that in the context of not just our own people, but we have to put that in the context of opportunity that is available for everyone. And when you're forced to do that, you're also forced to look at the disparity and the discrepancy between, you know, the non-minorities and the minorities and people of color, and then the double minority being women of color. And so I'm curious to also understand some things that we actually don't track here, which are, you know, why is it that the non-minorities are getting these wild, crazy valuations and abilities to go public, you know, in the middle of a global pandemic? And while we know that there are a variety of industries, you know, that have done incredibly well because of the pandemic specifically, we also know that there are industries that continue to be hand-tied in many ways by the pandemic, coupled with the racial reckoning. So I want to, for all of you who are listening and joining us today in the audience, I want to celebrate all of you and all of your strides towards innovation and entrepreneurship. I also want to celebrate our resiliency, that in still knowing how much and how far we are outpaced, that it doesn't allow us to slow down our fervor, our excitement, and our commitment, our dedication, our drive to succeed. I think that is what makes people of color, women of color, so incredible, is that we can still show up as our best, doing our best and greatest work, even when we know that maybe it's not seen at the same value or the same magnitude as it is in the eyes of society, comparatively to the non-minorities. And so I think this is that moment in time where we must pause and we must stop and say, this is great, let's keep doing it. I want to encourage all of you to keep growing towards that $1 million, $1 billion unicorn mark. But let's also acknowledge that this is not acceptable and that there is more work to be done. And please know that we at Digital Undivided are going to be doing that work. We are going to be sounding that alarm. We are going to be making those calls to action. And while I've been in this industry as, you know, an entrepreneur 3 times over of my own incredibly successful companies, making investments into a wide portfolio of other startups in which I am personally invested as an angel investor, or where I have invested previously with my own venture capital firm, I have a few billion-dollar unicorns in my portfolio too. And I want to make sure that we see more of this. And so that is also why our research is going to be more frequent this year in 2021 at a minimum of once per quarter, so 4 times per year. And again, taking deep dives into what we've discussed today, but also taking even deeper dives into some very specific trends that we see that Danielle and I are deeply curious about. But Danielle, you also spent nearly 15 years in academia, right? At the highest level, doing data research and evaluation over at the CUNY School, the Macaulay School of Honors. And I would just love for you to also share maybe how examining what's happening in the startup landscape might draw some comparisons or contrast against some trends that you were already maybe seeing around innovation with the lens of academia before joining us to give this lens of innovation meets entrepreneurship.
Yeah, so there are a few key trends, or a few key findings, or just facts, I should say, about you know, women of color founders that have been true for some time. So for years now, Black women and Latinas have been among the fastest growing groups of entrepreneurs. And so this is one reason why I'm so interested in the work of Digital Undivided, and why I know it's so important, because again, this is a group of founders who are very motivated, who are very innovative, who have been starting businesses for as long as they've had an opportunity to start businesses. And there are so many reasons why that's happening. So we have, just the excitement around owning one's own work, right? We have the excitement and interest around being one's own boss, pursuing, your dreams. And then there are also those community factors that are so important, right? So many women of color are breadwinners for their families, or maybe they're working multiple jobs. They're caretakers for people in their families. And so there's an imperative for them to earn, right? And to try to support their families and their communities in as many ways as possible. And so, this is something that I'm just continuing to see in looking at this, particular group of founders that we are including in our ProjectDiane research. There's so much innovation across, again, a range of industries. We're seeing founders all over the country. So even though we've seen, the bulk of our founders on the coast in California and New York, nearly every state is represented in our database. And so we want to, again, just continue to encourage founders to pursue their dreams, right? To start their businesses, to seek out support, to work with organizations like Digital Undivided that are committed to supporting these founders, because again, we know that Black and Latinx women founders are excited about starting their businesses. They are serious about their businesses, and so we're seeing that trend, across all sorts of industries, again, all sorts of locations, and they're just really these big drivers for these communities in particular.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Women of color, Black and Latinx women never give up. And when we do, we aren't really giving up. It's normally a pivot, and that persistence will come back to visit you again. It gives me hope seeing the database grow and seeing the $1 Million Club grow as well. But the progress is still too slow, far too slow. And we have work to do that I want to promise all of you we are committed to doing every single day at Digital Undivided. Myself, Danielle, our programs team, community team, we strive every day at Digital Undivided to provide the critical support and advocacy to Black and Latinx women founders who find innovative ways to support their families and communities through entrepreneurship. We see you, we support you. And whether you're an ally, an investor, a corporate leader, or a supporting organization or policymaker, we hope you take this time to read the ProjectDiane 2021 update and insights. Take a look at the data and think about what you can do to advance equity in entrepreneurship. Think about the conversations that we can have together towards solutions. I thank you for joining us at another edition of Undivided We Rise. And again, I encourage you to please visit ProjectDiane.com to learn more about our work, our research, and to understand and see these findings and to explore them for yourself in real time. The website is incredible, it's dynamic, and it has a map. I encourage you to explore it. Tell us if we've missed anything. Let us know where you're going next. Make sure that we can continue tracking you and your business. And again, thank you again so much for joining us. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.